Alright, Ghetto Playtest Explanation Part 1. Here we're going to talk about the adventure stage, which is where the first two-thirds or so of the game really happens. So first we'll go into general board layout. So obviously you have your deck, which is going to consist of monsters, fate cards, tamers, things like that really let you play your game. Then you have your location deck, and those are the things that are going to dictate basically what types of monsters you're going to play. And then your discard pile. Each deck is going to start off with a starter tamer, and in the first set that'll consist of like the 5 starter monsters, and then your team is going to go over here next to them that you accrue throughout the game. Over here you have your wild zone. As you can see, your opponent also has one, etc. This is where whenever you play a monster, it will initially go to the wild zone. Whenever you play things from the wild zone, you don't own them. Instead, you have to use the monsters that you own to attack the ones here to then control them. So really the only resource that exists is having the right habitat from locations and the ability to defeat them in your wild zone. So here we have the adventure board, essentially. It's a 5x5 grid. Both players own the first 2 rows, and then there's the neutral zone here in gray. Once the neutral zone is filled, that is when the next stage of the game commences. So every turn, players will play the first card from their location deck, which obviously this does not match up in size, but bit by bit, row by row, you will fill this up until you start filling up the neutral zone. These ones here in blue are called fringe zones. This is where more special locations will exist. For instance, like the crypts or the power plant, or a more general area that I made called the far corners, where you find more rare and more powerful monsters. And so you do not have to utilize the fringe zones. If you only want to have more standard locations in your deck, you may, and that way you only have to fill up these 6 and then begin to fill up the neutral zone, which allows for faster gameplay. So what a typical turn will look like: start of your turn, you'll draw a card from your main deck into your hand. Then you'll play a location card, just the top one, and then place it in whatever applicable row you don't have filled up yet. And normally those will have various effects, a lot of search effects, things like that. It spawns monsters. Then you have a couple actions you can take. You can play a monster from your hand that you have the applicable location card. So if it says like woodlands and you own a woodlands anywhere, you can play it. You throw that down in your wild zone. Then you may use monsters from your actual team to attack these to capture them. So, for instance, let's say this Agoribus, who, look at that quality, is on your team. He's a malicious type. You get a 100 power bonus against any type that you are advantageous against. So I use Agoribus to attack Merc, is what I shorten his name to typically. He's my favorite monster, but Mercostormer is the best I got for that. So the 500, he gets the 100 power boost, beats Merc. Now I have a big boy on my team. And the adventure phase is that simple. During your turn, you can play one monster, and you can attack one monster. However, if you forego the play phase, you can make 2 attacks, but you cannot do the reverse. So you can only, unless effects say otherwise, you can only play one monster into the wild zone at any given turn, but you can do 2 attacks per turn. So if you have abilities that allow you to play extra monsters, you can capitalize off of those additional monsters out there to start ramping up your team. And that's the basics of the adventure stage. You're just going through, building up your team. It's really you versus your deck, and using fate spells and other things to dictate the flow that comes in the next stage, the conflict stage.